start on time, and that way as well we can finish on time. So I'm Libby, and I've just been talking to Robin, who you might have heard our chat just then.
And I'm not going to stay around. And don't forget to record.
I will. I'm already recording.
Oh, you are too. Sorry. I'll say goodbye.
Thanks, Robin.
Bye.
Bye. So Robin's managed all the enrolments for today, and you'll receive a follow-up email from today as well, and that'll come to you from Robin. So if you have more questions after today, or if you need some follow-up information, feel free to email Robin, but I've also given you my email as well, so that you're welcome to email me. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. I think it's particularly special that everyone is joining me this afternoon for some fun about teaching strategies for literacy. I am a teacher in the ACT, where I've been practicing here for 9 years. During that time, I've taught across a range of year levels, from K to 6. I've also worked as an ELAD, or English as an Additional Language and Dialect specialist. And I've worked as a literacy consultant around schools here in the ACT. And my current position, though, is as a teacher librarian. So I did a Masters of Teacher Librarianship a few years ago. I'm really passionate about quality literacy teaching, running professional development on literacy teaching in schools, and I've been doing that around the ACT and also nationally. I love writing for publications as well, and I'm in a few alien publications. So I'm really what you'd call a self-proclaimed nerd burger. And I'm actually currently studying my 3rd Masters of Education, and this one's a research Masters, which is lots of fun. It keeps me quite busy. I'm conducting this training this evening from some training rooms here in the ACT, and they have these sensor lights that like to go off every half an hour. So if you see me wildly waving my arms around, that's mostly to keep the sensor lights on and not just because I'm crazy. So this professional development is focused around some of the key teaching strategies as presenting in this book. You would have received your copy of this book. You guys are super lucky if you did receive your copy of this book, because you are one of the last lot of people to be able to participate in this training. The book has now sold out, so there are no more. Well, there might be some in some little warehouse somewhere, but you guys are so lucky to be able to be a part of this. Alia's not running this training again, so what you learned tonight, I hope that it's valuable and that you can take it away and use it in your teaching. So my aim in this workshop is really to assist those beginning teachers in understanding these strategies and being able to use them in their classrooms, and for those who are more experienced to have the opportunity to evaluate their literacy practices, discuss these and refine them in any way they feel they might need to. This professional development isn't about programs or plans, it's really the bedrock before planning stage, kind of answering that question, what would I see in an effective literacy classroom? And really we just need a broad range of strategies, and we need to plan for these to suit our goals and our needs in our classrooms. Personally, this book means a lot for me. I was gifted it in my first year of teaching. I read it cover to cover in the first few weeks. I liked so many pages, and I was so pleased to discover strategies I was unsure of in my undergraduate degree. I was able to learn them again, and then there were other ones that I'd never even heard of that I fell in love with as soon as I read about them, and I put them straight into my teaching, where they've stayed since. So I've told you a little bit about myself. I think before we get started, it's always nice to hear a little bit about all of you and where you're teaching, also so that I can cater this for you as well. So in the chat, or turn off your mute on your microphone and feel free to talk. And tell me about where you are in Australia, and you know, what state you're in, because we're coming from all different states in Australia this afternoon. Perhaps what age group you're teaching or year level you're teaching. And you can even tell us how long you've been teaching for, if you'd like to. So where you're from and what you're teaching.
Hi everyone, I'm happy to go first. I'm Georgie. I'm a Year 2 teacher at Farrer Primary in Canberra. And this is my first year teaching. I did 6 months in the classroom when I finished my master's last year, and so this is my first full year.
Awesome.
Yes, I'm a refugee from the APS, I guess, from Canberra.
Oh, nice. Awesome. And Ruth has introduced herself. She is a Year 1 teacher, and she's in Queensland. So we've got Year 2, we've got Year 1. This is good. We've got some early years. Anyone else from middle years or upper? Any other Year 1, Year 2 teachers out there?
Hi, I'm Selena. I live far north Queensland, a couple of hours west of Cairns. I'm actually an undergraduate student. I'm due to graduate at the end of the year, and I'm doing early childhood. I'll be going on my final prac in the next 2 weeks, but with the whole corona epidemic, I hope my school's still going to be open for me to go to prac.
Yeah.
And I'm focusing on a literacy unit when I do my prac, so this is really timely. And looking to it.
That's exciting, Serena. Yeah, I know that there's a few pre-service teachers here. So Helen's also pre-service with us this evening. She's got a prep Year 1 class, and she's been working as a teacher's aide. This might actually help you in that as well, Helen. I've been running this workshop for teachers' aides and teacher assistants as well. And Andrew's also introduced herself. She's an ES, education support in a primary school in Melbourne. And you're studying your Masters of Teaching at the moment. That's awesome. And Amanda's also pre-service in early childhood. So we've got a few pre-service early childhood teachers. Is there anyone that's secondary with us this evening? There's a few people whose names I can see there that haven't quite told us what year group they're teaching. So
Hi, I'm going to use my video only, audio only. I'm Michelle. I'm actually a casual teacher, and I'm also gone back to study my Masters in Special Education. And I myself am meant to be doing a practical and do not know if it's going to be occurring.
Yeah. I feel for you, Michelle, and I feel for you, Serena. It's such a tricky time. Yeah. So you've already been working as a casual teacher, Michelle, and you're working on special education or special needs education now. In primary school, I'm assuming, Michelle?
Yes, focusing on primary school, yes.
Okay, cool. I think, oh yes.
Hello everyone. I am a 4th year undergrad at Macquarie studying primary teaching. Was about to go on placement. That placement has been postponed. I wanted to work with stage 1 or early stage 1, but I was put on a year 4 class instead. But my hope is at some point to spend some time working in early stage 1, so I thought this would be a helpful resource to go into that. So, yeah.
The thing is, teaching will always be there. Mm-hmm. So, and this is what I've said to a few people that have said it this afternoon. I feel your pain because, yes, the looming cancellation of schools, cancellation of visitors that we all feel right now is, yeah, it's really tricky to sit in this balance. But these are strategies that are time tested that we're going to be able to use, once some of this stuff calms down and we get into those classrooms as well, or we're already in the classrooms, wherever you're at. Was there anyone else that didn't get to introduce themselves? I'll also let you know that this evening is recorded. So if any stage your internet drops out or, I drop out, then don't stress. There is a recording that you'll be able to access later.
Libby, my video is off, but I'm Georgie and I'm a Year 1 teacher at an independent girls' school in Brisbane.
Awesome. Thanks, Georgie. So early childhood as well. Wow, lots of early childhood this afternoon, which is so exciting. I love early childhood, but not to say that I don't love. Oh, and we have Catherine. Sorry, I think I missed you. So Catherine as well is in Hobart in Tasmania, and she's doing physical education teacher and literacy support teacher, kinder to year 6. Wow, so a lot of So sorry, Alexandra, I'll just let you say that again. I think something's happening, yeah, with your audio there. Good try though. And we can try again later. Sometimes it's my connection that doesn't pick up the audio properly and everyone else has heard it and I'm sitting here looking like I'm an idiot. But feel free to use the chat as well. And I get it if you don't want to use your camera, it is the end of the day. But it's lovely to have a chatty group so I don't just talk to myself for 2 hours. If you still want to introduce yourself, feel free to do that on the chat. Otherwise, let's get started. So during this session, I'll be going over some of the following strategies. These are just a few of the strategies that are presented in the book. To begin with, we'll explore some of the fundamental strategies for teaching. These are strategies that you'll be using every day as a teacher of literacy. Following these, we'll focus on a few handy strategies that could be used across year levels and across disciplines as well. And then we'll look at some organisational strategies to have in your toolbox. And finally, there should be a little bit of time for questions at the end of the session. Keeping with the format of the book, for each strategy, I'll briefly explain the strategy and then I'll give some examples of how I've used it in my teaching. Following this, there'll be some little activities for you to do that hopefully will assist you to feel confident in using this strategy with your class. As I explain each strategy, it's a good idea to have the book near you so you can flick to that page and you can highlight or put post notes in or write any notes for yourself as well. So I'll let you know what page number we're going to as well. So let's get started. These first few strategies we will look at are fundamental to literacy classrooms, I'd say, and they're practices that you would be seeing every day or be using every day in your class. So they might be ones that are really familiar to you already. We're going to start with reading aloud. That's explained on page 42. I love to begin with reading aloud because I think it's something that you can begin your day with as well, really, and you can almost begin a literacy block with as well. It leads into a lot of other literacy practices and literacy strategies really well. So that's why I like to start with reading aloud. Now, it seems like a really simple strategy, but actually there are a few things to remember if you want this to be a really thoughtful read aloud and you want to use it as a strategy to teach some things about reading. The first step is that you need to choose a great text. So what you need to choose is something that you enjoy reading, something that you love. If you love the text, then that will be so clear to your students, that will come across to them. So choose something that you love. Choose a book that you love, choose an article that you love, anything that you love, because we really want to pass on that passion for reading to our students. I've also written here text, not book, because it's important to remember that there's such a variety of digital and multimodal text now available that we can engage with our students. And I know for those students who are sometimes a little bit more disengaged, sometimes these alternative formats really develop that engagement again in books. One type of book that really interests me at the moment, and I've definitely been able to engage with, are augmented reality books. If you're not sure what these are, they're physical books, but they have almost like QR codes or parts in them that you can scan with any device. And when you scan that part in the book, you get extra content on the device. So for example, my son and I found a Toy Story 3 augmented reality book at our library and How to Train Your Dragon. And what would happen with these books, or with the How to Train Your Dragon book, when we scanned a page, you then got to fly the dragon around the room and make it sit on someone's head, and you actually could interact with this book. There's also another beautiful dragon series that's a novel series by an New Zealand author. So look up augmented reality books, especially for kids. There are some beautiful ones out there now, and they can be so engaging. The other type of book that I think is really interesting and especially good for those of us that are working in early childhood are app books. So these are the ones that you can download as an app on any smart device. And rather than them be a paper book that you turn the pages of, you're turning the pages on the app. But what's even better is you can generally click into parts, they can come to life, and you can find out different vocabulary by pressing on different things. I know all the Dr. Seuss books now are app books, but a company that I really like that created a few really good app books was a company called Wheelbarrow. They made an app book for The Very Cranky Bear. They made one for The Wrong Hat. And they had one for The Rules of Summer by Sean Tan. Beautiful app books. There was also an app book for The Heart in the Bottle by Oliver Jeffers, which was another gorgeous one. So these are books that the students can actually interact with as well. So sometimes getting that engagement back in the read aloud can be really good. But if you are having trouble finding a book that you love, so you've thought, oh, I can't really think of anything that I loved reading when I was a kid, which is very rare, or maybe you're trying to find something for a particular year group that you don't know if it's appropriate, there are two places that I recommend you go, and that is the Children's Book Council of Australia. So the CBCA, they're the ones who organise Book Week every year. And they have their current, if I go back to the current, they've got their current, short list up there, their notables for 2020 already. But even better than that is they've also got all the previous winners listed. So here are the notables for 2020. Now, all of these are listed under kind of an age group. So you've got younger readers, early childhood, and so on. So you can kind of get an idea of, I guess, which authors are good authors to look out for. And if you have any of these books in your library, then you know that they're going to be quality. But the other thing that I like to do on the CBCA website is go to the previous winners, and there you've got lists and lists and lists of books and authors of previous years. So if you're not sure where to find a good quality book, well, I'd look at Children's Book Council of Australia first. The other place though that I love, and I always find a lot of my books for book studies and for read alouds, is Reading Australia. So this website organises books by primary, secondary and tertiary level, but even better than that, they've actually got the year groups for each book. And the reason why they have this is because each book comes with a teacher resource attached. And these are free teacher resources that go through stages of learning. So you can almost use it as a book study. But if you're doing this as a read aloud, it has some really good connected into prior knowledge and before reading activities for each of these books as well. So that can be really useful. The other thing is, if you're trying to think about a theme, you can actually search books here around theme. Like, I don't know, belonging? Yeah. So do be aware that you'll get books up to tertiary level, but there are a lot of different books on there as well. So Reading Australia is a place to go if you're trying to find a good book for a read aloud. So when you're choosing your book, make sure it's something though that you love, something that you can get passionate about. Then the next thing to do is to rehearse, because a read aloud, when it's done in this manner, is really like a performance. So it's important that we rehearse those texts before we read them to the students. Ones that we can almost recite from memory are great books to be able to read. But rehearsing can also give you this confidence to let your inner actor out. When I was reading The Magic Hat to a group of kinder students, when I rehearsed it, I noticed this rhythm to it. the magic hat, it moved like this, it moved like that. And then these little hand gestures that I was doing, the kids actually picked up on that. And I did that as a read aloud along across a whole week with this kinder group of kids. And by the end of the week, they were reading along with me, no worries at all, which was really, really helpful then for the following activities that we did with that book. But this is also important if you are in upper years, to be reading ahead of what you're going to read aloud to students. So I've done it when I've read more complex texts like The Rabbit-Proof Fence, and I was reading this with a group of Year 5 students, and there was a lot of themes that I actually had to prepare the students for. So I really needed to be aware of what was coming and how quickly I could move through these chapters when I needed to slow down. Be aware that a read aloud is different from modelled reading. So when I talk about modelled reading, that's when I'm reading and I'm showing students the skill of reading. So I'm showing them that I'm following the words with my finger, or I'm following them with my eyes. Oh, I've made a mistake, and I do those think alouds and talk alouds. I'm going to go back and say it again. A read aloud is more of a performance. It's about allowing students to internalise the story. So the third step is about how we introduce the book. Now that's going to be dependent on the book and on your students. I've worked with a lot of ELAD students, so for them, the introduction of the book often takes weeks and weeks and weeks because they might not have a lot of the prior knowledge that the book expects of them. I used the Possum Magic with this group of ELAD kinder students, and our introduction of that book took 2 weeks because we had to make pavlova and eat Vegemite sandwiches. We looked at a map of Australia and saw where all the cities were. We looked at all the Australian animals and you know, talked about how they act and how they behave. And this is all that developing that prior knowledge, opening up the prior knowledge that might already be there as well. So the fourth step, that's okay, Helen. Not a worry at all. I feel your pain. I often get that as well. Yeah, and just send an email through to Robin about that one. So the fourth step here is that you can just read. And I love the part in this book which says avoid interruptions. It's so important to feel that we can just allow students to listen to a book the way an author's intended it to be heard. You don't need to stop. You don't need to talk about the images. You don't need to explain things because you've done all that as you've introduced the book. So you can actually just enjoy it and just read it. You might want to, if you're reading a longer book, you might need to stop at chapters or something like that, but you might have a way of actually keeping tabs on where you're up to. Summarising as well. And then the fifth step is that we allow students to respond somehow. Now that could be as simple as questions or comments at the end of the text, or you might want to have a more focused response, such as on a particular reading strategy. So you might want them all to tell you about their connections to the text. How did you connect to this text? What parts of it remind you of your life? And we're also going to talk about responses to text when I get to reading journals at the end of this session. Okay, so now for a little activity for you. I want you to listen to Stephen Lane read. Stephen Lane is a wonderful educator and author, and he's written a lot about the benefits of the read aloud, and he highly encourages educators just to read aloud more and more. This is him reading one of his books, and after we've listened, I'll ask you what you noticed about him and his read aloud, and I might get you to practice reading a part of a text with as much flair as Stephen Lane does. So I'm just going to flip over to that screen now. Where are we at? Oh, and I'm just going to make sure actually that you can hear what I can hear as well, because I often forget to do this. Oh, he looks all green at the moment. Let's fix that, shall we?
Let me share this morning one of my books that is a hit with young readers because it speaks to an experience so many of them can relate to firsthand. You see, my daughter, Victoria, was not nearly so thrilled as the rest of the family at the arrival of baby Jackson in our home. To coin a phrase, she was coming undone. My oldest boy had graciously welcomed Victoria into the home, but she was not nearly so pleased about Jackson's arrival. And everybody rushing around, "Oh, Victoria, look at your baby brother. Isn't he cute?" And she would growl like a wild animal. Her first comment to us was, "Send the baby back. I'm the baby in the Lane family." And she continued to this day to be a bit of a diva, I have to say. The first time they were alone together, little Jackson was sitting in the pouch of this baby saucer. He couldn't stand, of course, at that time, and playing with his toys. My wife called me into the dining room to help her put a leaf in the table, and this left Victoria alone in the family room with baby Jack. I'm not quite sure how a 4-year-old managed this, but suddenly we hear the loudest crash I think I've ever heard, wild screams from the baby, and we come racing into the room to find that she has not tilted the baby saucer, teachers. She has thrown the entire thing completely over. It's upside down. His feet are in the air. His head is underneath it. The arms are flailing out from the sides. He's screaming. And my wife is, of course, falling to her knees and extracting him from this device. And Victoria is leaning against the fireplace, you know, arms folded. The hip is jutted out like the Queen of Sheba. And I get down on my knees, so I'm on her level, primary people, and I said, "Victoria Grace, what did you do to the baby?" And she said, "Nothing! He just fell!" I hollered over my shoulder for my wife to handle this, please, because I had to go and write it down. And what came out of it was "Love the Baby," illustrated by my good friend, Ard Hoyt. Mommy's first flowers bloomed the day baby came home. I was happy, but not for long. Babies aren't much fun. They can't play marbles or soccer or animal safari. What babies mostly do is cry. One night, I found Mommy rocking baby in our chair. I saw her tummy tickle baby the way she tummy tickles me. "Help me love the baby," Mommy said. So I tickled baby, but not on the tummy. I only pretended to help Mommy love the baby. In the summertime, when Nana came to visit, baby was big enough for a special Nana bath. Nana sang baby our scrub-a-dub song. "Help me love the baby," Nana sang. So I sang for baby, but not the scrub-a-dub song. I only pretended to help Nana love the baby. Everywhere we went, everybody told me, "Love the baby!" My neighbor, Mrs. Wilson, and my barber, Mr. Nelson, and even my Aunt Esther told me, "Love that baby." On the day of the big snow, I ran in to show Daddy my best snowman ever. Daddy and baby were building towers with our blocks. "Help me love the baby," Daddy called. So I built a tower for baby, and then I knocked it down. I wasn't helping anybody love that baby. But when baby cried and cried that night, no one came to help. So I tippy-toed in. Baby sat up and smiled. I tummy tickled baby. Baby giggled, tee hee hee. I sang the scrub-a-dub song. Baby sang along, gaga. I built a giant tower of blocks for Baby to knock down. Boom, I shouted. Baby shouted, goo. When I read my favorite book out loud, Baby fell asleep. I'm all done pretending. I love my baby. The end.
So what did you notice about Stephen Lane and how he, I guess, shared that read aloud? What kind of struck you about it?
He used really great expression in his voice.
Yeah, so his voice was extremely expressive, wasn't it? It wasn't even just a little bit up and down, like he went to extremes, didn't he? Perfect. Anything else that you guys noticed?
Even though you could just picture the little girl's face just without any illustrations or even his facial expressions, because they were a little bit distorted. Yeah, his voice did the whole thing.
That's exactly it. Even just from looking at his expressions, you could see, yeah, how that that little girl would have felt. Yeah, and he was so animated. That's so true. He created those characters through the voice, is what Jen's saying, and his whole body was involved in this retelling. You can see as well how engaging it is, can't you? When someone reads aloud and it's like this performance, their voice is going up and down, and that's getting your attention, because you know you're not listening to monotone. You're listening to this, emotional voice as well. Catherine said. Yeah, that's so true. It makes you want to listen, and the drama that he performs with as well. I think that any teacher can read like Stephen Lane. I don't think that he's got some special gift that only he can do it. But I think what stops us is that feeling of freedom when we enter the classroom. We'll go to do a read aloud, and we don't want to seem like a weirdo. So I think if we put that beside us for one moment and just let that inner actor out, these read alouds could be so powerful, and kids could learn so much from them. One thing I always note is the way that he reads certain words actually helps me to comprehend them. I think about if I was listening to that story and I was learning English as a second language or as an additional dialect, and I heard him say something like, and then I knocked it down, I know what's happening in that story, even if I don't quite understand the words. His voice goes down, but also there's this anger behind it. So I can actually infer the meaning of those words, and I can say, well, they knocked it down, but they didn't knock it down because it was an accident. I can tell they knocked it down because they were angry about it. So the way that we actually perform a read aloud actually helps students to be able to have that inferential meaning. So that's exactly it. If we let go of those inhibitions, kids love it and they can engage with it so much easily. So, and they're like the least judgmental. I mean, I've been an idiot in front of a lot of kids. Challenge kids to just dance marathons, and they think it's hilarious, but like they don't hold a grudge against you. So feel free, in your teaching career to just have that opportunity to let go of inhibitions, especially for read alouds. Yes, Jen, he did. He told us that prior story and got us engaged in it. So he almost told a narrative for a narrative. And can you see as well that he actually was introducing the book to us by doing that? He was opening up that prior knowledge for us. He was saying, do you know about how it is when you have a child and then another child gets brought into the house? And we're like, yes, I've been there, or, my sister or my cousin, I remember when that happened. Or so he's actually opening up that prior knowledge. So that's what an introduction to a book can look like as well. It gets you curious as well about what's happening. So here, this is my little challenge to you. Here are the first 3 pages of Love the Baby that we just heard Stephen Lane read. Would anyone like to have a go of reading these pages to the group? I'll give you a minute in case you want to just collect your thoughts. But it's always great if we have some people let go of their inhibitions and give it a shot. You're never going to see any of us again. We're all in different states as well. Come on, who's going to give it a go?
Yeah, I don't mind. Oh, someone else, that's okay.
Awesome. Okay, off you go. We'll have to read aloud. Sounds great. Go for it. Heather, I think you've got the mic.
Oh, okay. Hi. Mummy's first flowers bloomed the day baby came home. I was happy, but not for long. That's my best.
Yay!
I've got my daughter here too, actually. I'll put it on video.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Heather.
She's interested in what's happening, so
Lovely.
there you go. Okay, I'll unmute.
Thank you for joining us. Did you want to go have a go as well?
Yeah. Babies aren't much fun. They can't play marbles or soccer or animal safari. Babies mostly do is cry.
That's perfect. Absolutely wonderful. And you can see how, like, you know, these stories, they lend themselves to that kind of dramatic reading as well. Wow, 2 read alouds. Can I just say, you guys have set a record for the final workshop in this series. I have never had 2 people grab the mic and read aloud. In fact, for a lot of them, no one does. So, but I kept that a secret. So that's amazing. You guys are stars already. We're going to move on now to guided reading. This is explained on page 24 if you want to flick to page 24. So I think these pages define guided reading really well. I think there's a lot of mystery around guided reading. I felt it particularly as a pre-service teacher. I didn't want to go and interrupt the teacher who was reading and be like, so what are you actually doing when you're down here on the floor with a group of kids? So I learned a lot from this as a pre-service teacher, but I've also learned a lot of this as I've moved through the year levels, because guided reading looks really different if you're down in kinder or prep or foundation to if you're up in year 6 or even further than that. So have realistic expectations of the students you're working with. That's what I want to start with, because the most common question I get asked about guided reading is, well, what should the other students be doing during guided reading? If I'm working with this little group here on the floor, what should everyone else be doing? Well, the answer is actually very simple. They should be reading. They don't need to be colouring or drawing or filling in black line masters. They should just be reading. And make sure your students know that guided reading is a time for them to read and to work on their reading and to practice their reading strategies. So when you think about guided reading in that way, it does mean that you have to define it a little bit differently in terms of time. So for kinder, you need to think about how long they can read independently for, so that your guided reading sessions would only go for that amount of time. So for example, at the start of the year, getting kinders to read for more than 5 to 10 minute blocks is asking a lot of them. I would probably only be expecting 10 minutes at the most. And a lot of that time with kinder, if they are pre-readers, or sorry, down in foundation year 1 area, they might just be flicking through and doing those reading skills during this guided reading session, or reading pictures. But you know, you might have a few as well who are early readers and they are starting to decode some words, which is great. Use guided reading for that time. However, as you move up the year groups, you know, by the time you get to year 6, guided reading can easily go for 25 to 45 minutes, because the students have that ability to keep the stamina in their reading for that amount of time. If you do have those shorter sessions of guided reading, there's nothing to say that you don't have 2 separate sessions of guided reading throughout the day. And that means that then you get to listen to each of your students read throughout the week. So the steps that are explaining teaching strategies for literacy are detailed in what you do before reading, during reading, and after reading. So before a guided reading session, you need to group your students based on some kind of assessment. Now, this might be like a running record assessment, such as PM benchmarks or Fontes and Pinnell. Or you might group your students based on reading conferences, which I'm going to talk about next. Now, depending on what you use and how you want to make this work for your class, you might group them based on a reading level. But one thing that I like to do as well is group my students based on reading strategies that they're working on. So if I have strategy-based groups, that means that I might have a group that they're all working on their accuracy. So going back and checking if they're making errors in their reading. I might have a group that's all working on their fluency. So actually reading with that fluency, changing their pitch and their volume as they're reading, stopping when they're seeing punctuation, all that kind of stuff. And that frees you up a little bit when you group your students based on strategy. The second step is to select a text. So I also want to note here that the text that you're reading with your group, it doesn't need to be the same for all students. You might allow students to choose their text. Now, this is generally an approach that I've seen more in senior years, but it can possibly work for junior years as well. But depending on what strategy you're going for, sometimes having all the students have the same text can be really good. It can be almost a book study. If you're in a school where you don't have a lot of resources and it's hard to get, 4 or 5 books of the one type, do the dodgy and do a partial photocopy of one of those books that you've been reading in class. The Magic Hat that I talked about before, I used that then as my guided reading book for this group of kindergartners. Perfect book. They knew the story already. We'd been reading it aloud that week. And what I did was I just photocopied a few of the pages, and that was our guided reading book for that group. But yes, when students start to disengage, so I'm thinking more, year 3s and onwards, sometimes allowing them that choice over what books they read can be really powerful. I mean, it can work in younger years as well, though. The next step, again, is to build the field, which by that I mean to open up prior knowledge. So whatever book you're going to be reading with in these guided reading groups, you need to make sure that the students have that prior knowledge already opened, or if they don't have prior knowledge in that area, you need to give it to them. So, when you are doing this as a book study, you're looking at that book together, you're thinking about some of those themes that are in the book, and you're working out, okay, well, what do we know about that? So, for example, if I was doing Mutt Dog with a group of students, we perhaps would talk about what dogs are to begin with, how they behave. And I know that central to the idea of this book is that the dog is homeless and goes to a homeless shelter and then gets a home. So what is really important that the students understand, the concept that's really important that they understand, is not only the concept of what dogs are, but also where they live. Where do dogs generally live? And also, I guess, what is it to be homeless? So what does it mean if you don't have a home? What do you think people in a city, where do you think people in a city might go if they're not home, if they're homeless? Well, they might go to a place called a homeless shelter, and then you might explain what that is, or a city refuge, as it's mentioned in this book. So, those concepts are actually really difficult ones to talk about in the junior years, but I love this book, and it's such a high quality text and an easier text to read. So it is one that you could read, in year 2 with a group of guided reading students. So then, fourth step is that it's important then to tell the story to the students before they read it, using the vocabulary of the text. Now, this might be vocabulary you've already started to introduce as you've developed that prior knowledge. One book that I used for a group of 4-5s was the Gizmo. Again, it was a group of students that were mostly ELAD, and there is a part in the Gizmo where actually there's a lot of slang in the gizmo, but there's a part in the gizmo where the boy has to swap clothes with a tramp, and by that, again, they're talking about someone who is kind of down on their luck. And what's important for the students to understand is what that vocabulary means. So as I'd be reading through, I would actually use that vocabulary when I got to that page. Oh, and then he met a tramp who he thought looked really nice, had a kind face, and then suddenly the gizmo started to buzz, and when it beeped, they swapped clothes. How do you think? And then he was feeling really upset, and he'd scratched his knee when he'd fallen over. Anyhow, so what I'm doing though is I'm actually turning the pages as I'm telling the story. You can tell I'm not reading it now. I'm just telling the story, and as I'm doing that, I'm turning the pages. Now, what's really key here is that the students are getting the meaning of the text as well as that vocabulary. Because when the students go to read that text then independently during reading time, what's great is you've given them these little hints so that if they ever get stuck, they can kind of think, okay, well, what did Mrs. Baker say was happening on this page? That's right. She said that Floggett said it was a wimp. Oh, so maybe it says don't be a wimp. So they can use their meaning to decode, but they can also use the meaning that you've given them in that storytelling to not lose track. So a lot of our kids that have trouble with decoding will often lose track of a story, lose track of the meaning if they're struggling to decode every word. If that makes sense. So using that vocabulary of the text and flicking through the book so they've got those visual cues for their reading as well can be really useful. And then you're up to reading time. So during reading in my classes, I would generally have that group that I'm working with on the floor or at a table. And I take each student, we might talk a little bit about the strategy that we're focusing on that day, and then I'd let students individually and independently read. Meanwhile, the rest of the class are independently reading, and they can be doing that in small groups, or they can be doing that wherever, sitting at their desks individually. It doesn't matter too much. I then take students away from the group and I listen into individuals. I listen into each student for maybe a minute or two. So I just say, just shuffle back a little bit. Let's tell me where you're up to, and then let's start reading. And I listen to them read, and I take some notes during this time about what they're doing in their reading. And I'm going to talk about that in a moment, what that might look like. And then finally, after reading, it's important that you allow all the students to respond. So that's every student in your classroom. So they all need to be able to respond to what they've been reading. And again, that might be based on a strategy. So if, you know, before you've started that reading, you've said, all going to be focusing on our predicting today, and I want you to be predicting what's going to happen next in your story, or we're going to think about getting into the author's head today. I want you to be asking questions to the author. Then actually what your response might be based around that strategy. But there are a few other examples of responses at the end of the guided reading strategy in the book on page 25. Also, this response keeps students accountable, especially if they're working independently. Then you are checking in on them that they have been reading and they have been able to respond to their reading. Again, it doesn't have to be in writing. It can be by drawing a picture. It can be by, you know, creating something. So think as well creatively when you think about that response, especially for the junior years. I'm going to show you a text now, and I want you to think about what prior knowledge might be needed and what vocabulary might need explanation if this was a book that you were to read for guided reading. It's over here. There we go. Might just make this window a little bit bigger for you. Okay. Now this is a gorgeous book by Graham Base. It's a picture book. Oh, and it's not loading. Let's see if I can just get it to load again. Okay, there we go. Oh, sorry, now it skipped a lot. I'm just going to scroll down. If you notice something that you think would need explaining or some vocabulary that would need a definition, then feel free to talk on the mic or pop it in the chat, and I'll just be quiet for a moment and I'll just do some scrolling. Any concepts that you think would need explanation?
There's a lot of slang, like not slang, but like Australian language a lot of people wouldn't know, even young Australians now, like, you know, what is it? Fairway North, I guess, and miles. Like a lot of kids wouldn't know what miles were.
Yeah, that's true.
I think you would even need to just start with grandma, because I know that where I live, not everybody calls their grandma grandmas.
Yes, and that's really common now as well, isn't it? To understand what that vocabulary means, grandma, and also to understand in the context of this text, where I think what Graham Base is trying to say is that instead of this grandma sitting in a rocking chair and knitting, look at these things that this grandma's doing, but actually the way that we view grandparents now has changed dramatically, because often grandparents are sometimes even primary caregivers, if not secondary caregivers for a lot of our students. And they're still working. We've got some good language as well here in the chat, that pubs and pumps, yes, the younger children, what a pub is, gig, at the bit. A good spotting there as well of some really interesting vocabulary. Anything else you spotted? Yes, we shouldn't assume they know the animals. Yeah. Yeah, if reading in the USA or UK, they might not know a bandicoot or kangaroo. Look, I would be able to list some students in my classroom that probably don't know what a bandicoot or a kangaroo is as well. You know, and in Canberra, sometimes we have kangaroos down the street, but if you haven't been here for that long, yeah, you might not know. That's so true as well, Laura, that you can actually look up where those places are. Yeah, and Jen said some of the animals as well. Also with kangaroos, if you don't understand that kangaroos, how they move, then you won't know that a hopping steed is actually referring to a kangaroo. A steed as well, Casey. Casey's thinking the same thought as me, that's another word that isn't used anymore, and that we need to understand that the grandmother is riding this kangaroo like a horse to be able to comprehend what's going on here. So you can see there's so much there, right? And this is a picture book. Yes, that's so true, Catherine. You do need to stop and look it up, yeah, which can be really useful, but it's also just as useful to do that beforehand as well, and to kind of prepare your students. And I mean, there might be times where it catches you out and you go, oh, that's something that we haven't actually talked about, and you've got no idea. And I remember actually when I was reading the Gizmo, one of the first times I was reading it, and I didn't even think about the gizmo, like a gizmo being a foreign word for a lot of students that I was working with. It's not something that they'd heard of before. Like, what does gizmo mean? And then trying to define and discuss gizmo is really important, that they understand that it's this little kind of crazy invention that does something. Yeah. Wow, great thinking, everyone. I am surprised at how switched on you all are for a Thursday afternoon. It's incredible. You're wowing me. But yeah, that prior knowledge is so important in comprehension, and we can't undervalue it. So it's really important. So yeah, you've all got really strong coffees next to you, don't you, Casey? So it's really important that we do make sure that we reach into that prior knowledge. Okay, next we're going to talk about reading conferences. If you have more questions about guided reading, feel free to pop them in the chat, or we can talk about them at the end of the session as well. So reading conferences are explained just over the page on pages 26 and 27. Now, I'm going to talk about the steps that are involved in a reading conference, but I really feel that to work smart and not as hard, reading conferences can very easily be fit or situated in guided reading. So when I am working with that student individually from the guided reading group, I'm generally running a reading conference with them. Yes, there might be times when you need to be able to run a reading conference with a student outside of guided reading time, but generally they are something that you can be doing in guided reading. They don't have to go for very long. So the steps here are that we firstly need to make a roster. Now this might look quite different depending on what year group you're teaching, but it's important to have some kind of way of scheduling these conferences so that you can listen to each child read each week, once a week. I ran this workshop and one of the teachers said that they actually have to listen to each child read in their classroom, I think, like 3 times a week. And I know that each school has different beliefs around this, but I personally feel that if you've got a class of 25 and more, once a week is just amazing. And so that's really what I aim for as well. If you've got less, maybe you can do more conferences, but again, depends on those children. So secondly, it's a one-on-one conference with a student choice book. So you can see here how the student choice is really important because it shows you how the student judges their reading ability. So if you have a student come to you and you actually think they're quite a capable reader and they've brought a really simple text, you can start questioning them about that. And okay, so do you think you could be reading something more challenging? And suddenly you've already got insight into that child's reading. If you have the opposite true and a child brings a text that's really challenging for them and you kind of talk to them about, well, I think there are books that are a better fit for you. I think this might actually be something that we aim towards. So allow it to be a student choice book some of the time when you do those reading conferences. I know that that's not possible all of the time, but it's really important as well for that student to see themselves as a reader, to be able to get those interests for themselves in a library. It's a skill for life. So the third step is that the student reads. Now this doesn't have to go for more than a minute or two. So as you sidle up to that student and sit down and start listening to them, it might be that if they're reading a picture book, they read maybe 3 pages, 4 pages, and if they're reading a chapter book, it generally would be 1 page, maybe 2 if they're a faster reader. So you listen to them read for a minute or two, and during this time you monitor and assess them. You might use a running record and want to keep track of their miscues, which are any little mistakes they might make in their reading. But generally what's good to record is the things that they are working on and the things that they are doing really well. So those 2 areas. And you can pick up on that within that minute or 2 of listening to the student read. Then this is where it becomes a conference. You actually talk to the student about their reading. You say, look, I noticed that today you were reading with a lot of fluency. It was really engaging the way that you were reading, and you were reading the characters' voices with, you know, different levels of pitch and volume. But one thing that I did notice is that you never went back and rechecked your reading, and you made a lot of errors, and you could have stopped and checked what you were reading. Or I noticed that you just, you know, bulldozed through the text and you didn't stop at punctuation. And really, yeah, that could be a way that we could develop your fluency. So you talk to the student about what's their next step, and record this as well in the reading conference. So this is one way that I've scheduled my reading conferences, and you can see clearly that this is in those guided reading groups. Now this was, these groups were based around strategies rather than levels. And I did that for a particular reason, and that was to actually make sure that my students who weren't all efficient readers weren't all in one group, and my students who weren't all unconfident readers were in another group. Because sometimes when you have that, then what happens is that you struggle to get through conferences with your students that might be less efficient readers. And with the other group, it's like, oh, it's a cinch. And then I've got 5 minutes left and guided reading still going. So rather than have that happen, what I did was I spread out the ability across the groups. So then it was easy for me to get through all the students in each group for each guided reading session. And I was able to run those small conferences with each of these students. So, you know, we had our fluency group, our working on vocabulary knowledge group. There is an issue though with having such a scheduled way of running reading conferences. Can anyone see what the issue might be? Yes, Laura's hit it on the head. If students are away, they might miss out. And, you know, David's family always like to go on these long weekends. So suddenly David's missed like, you know, 3 or 4 Fridays in a row, or maybe not even in a row. And I haven't got to read with David in quite a while. So I'm actually not sure where he's up to in his reading. The other thing is you think about all the interruptions to schooling, you know, and all the different things that go on in a schooling week. You know, suddenly there's a fire alarm drill on Wednesdays and now the Wednesday groups missed out. All that kind of stuff means that if we have really scheduled groups, it can be quite hard to keep track of the kids that you're getting to read with and not. So one thing that I moved towards, so I had the really scheduled groups, but then one thing I moved towards was like a spreadsheet where I had all the students' names, and this was also my way to record. And then at the top, I had the weeks. So week 1, week 2, week 3, and so on. And this is week 6, obviously. And then underneath that, I had what the goal was when I was listening to them and what an observation was that I had when I was listening to them. And you can see here, I got to read with all these students because they all have notes next to their names. And it was really clear for me, I could just do a quick glance over this sheet when I went to sit down next to a student and record something, who I'd missed out with that week. So that could be then someone that I could go in, if I had that spare minute during a guided reading group, go and sit down next to them and listen to them read for a minute or two as well. Or it might be that I pull that student out at another time and I listen to them read. So this actually helped me to really keep track of who I was reading with, but it also is a great way of recording your information that you're getting from the students from their reading. And it's also a way of being able to kind of, I guess, in a way, see their progress. So you could see what their goal was in the previous week, and that would be what you talk about when you started your guided reading with them. And then that might be in your observation as well. So you can see their progress as they move through. What information to record during a reading conference? Well, the book talks about recording the students' comprehension and their reading strategies and has lots of ideas of how to do that. But basically, when you record a student's comprehension, think about getting them to do a quick retell. So when you sidle up to them, if they've already been reading, that's really useful because you can say to them, so tell me about what just happened. And you'll be able to tell really quickly from their retell if they've understood or if they've comprehended, I should say, what they've read already. And you can note that quite easily. And the other thing that the book talks about is the strategies. So when you think about strategies for reading, you think about what miscues they're making. So perhaps they leave a word out, they omit a word. So you might write omits these words, or perhaps they only look at the beginning or the initial sounds of a word. So you might write that down. You might say that you had to give them several words as they were reading because they kept getting kind of stunted on or stuck on certain words. So you might write down, you know, looks for assistance when has trouble reading certain words. So all those little miscues that they're doing, all the things they're doing in their reading, those are the things that you can be writing down as well. But I think what's really important and something I've really learned is to think about myself as a reader and the reading practices that I use if I'm reading something challenging, and then apply that to your students. So rather than have a list of reading practices that you think students need to tick off, think about yourself. Think about, well, what would you do if you're reading a really challenging text? What strategies do you use, and what are the ones there that your students aren't using, and write those down as well. So just some examples here as well. For Griffin, for example, when I was reading with him for the minute or two I was listening to him, I noticed that he was decoding really well, and he was noticing interesting vocabulary, and he was actually writing these down on a post-it note while he was reading. One thing that I thought he could work on was actually connecting to his real world knowledge, and that was around his meaning. He kept losing track of meaning as he was reading, so that real comprehension side of things. But he was also stopping and pausing. Well, that was a goal for him, that he needed to start stopping and pausing with punctuation, so really noticing that punctuation. So Griffin and I then talked about that, and that was then his goal that he'd work on during reading that week. And then when we met again the following week, we could check up on how he was going with that goal. So if you're unsure about reading conferences, feel free to ask questions now, or even guided reading. I know that it does look a little bit different for junior. So if you've got a niggling question now, feel free to ask it. Pop it in the chat, or I'll be quiet in a second. But one book that I think is really great if you're interested in more about reading conferences is this one by Jennifer Severello and Gravity Goldberg. This is all about reading conferences, the whole book. It's fantastic and a really easy read as well. What they show in there is how they would keep the notes as well for a reading conference. So again, it's about those compliments, those positives, and then things to work on. And they would put a student's name on each page and date their notes as well. Again, this book advocates that reading conference doesn't have to go for more than a minute or two, which means that they're doable and that you can actually get them done with a whole class in a week. Okay, so now for a little activity. I'm going to get you to listen to a student read, and I want you to tell me what you notice and what you might record if you were doing a reading conference with them. This student is reading this page from Demon Dentist by David Walliams, chapter 1. So have a listen, and if you want to start typing in the chat, you can start typing what you're thinking in the chat down below, and then you can post it once the recording's over.
Hated going to the dentist. As a result, the boys' teeth were almost all yellow. The ones that weren't yellow were brown. They were bored, but the strains of the goodies that the children loved, but dentists hate. Sweets, fizzy drinks, chocolate. The teeth that were neither yellow nor brown simply weren't there anymore. They had fallen out. One had bitten into a toffee and stayed there. Assorting fruity flavoured chews had challenged. This is what young Arthur looked like when he smiled.
So what did you notice? And a few people have already noticed things. Is there anyone else that noticed anything that if you want to talk about it, you're welcome to?
This is really interesting because my little girl's 8 and she's in year 2, and when she reads aloud, she adds in a lot of extra words as well. So she just today, her teacher listened to her read, and I think it might be the first time he's listened to her read all year, but he was saying that because she's adding those extra words, he's taking her down some reader levels, even though she can read all the words. But so I just wondered it's obviously a common problem to add in extra words.
Sometimes it's it's almost like based around the meaning, and I think actually a lot of my students that have done that, or sometimes it's opposite when they omit a word, it's actually because they're reading so quickly. So sometimes if students are better readers, they omit words. What I go back to is, are they keeping the meaning there? Like, can she still retain the meaning even if she's adding extra words? But maybe the goal there is just accuracy, and it's more about that strategy than it is about a level.
Yeah, okay.
my initial thought. We've got here as well that not stopping to sound out or break down unfamiliar words, Casey. That rechecking as well. I think someone wrote that. Yes, and I love that Jen's written here that she does use sounding out as a strategy to figure out the word she's uncertain of. That, like, giving that positive to this student. If you were to sit down with them, as the first thing that you say to them, oh, I've noticed that you started using these sounding out strategies to try to figure out words, but actually you seem to lose it. So she says, what does she say for neither? It's like nearer. She says nearer. So she's looking at the first sound, but then loses it towards the middle of the word. So obviously the sounding out is not helping her retain that meaning either. So I'd say, okay, let's go back and check. Does it make sense? Make sure you ask yourself, does it make sense? And some other people, inflection is unusual. Yes, pacing is inconsistent, adding own words. I think as well, you can see when she kind of dives down in confidence and realizes, oh, this is quite hard. Not stopping. Yes. Wow, you guys got so much already. Did anyone have anything else that they noticed? You can see as well that was less than a minute that you were listening to this student read, and what you've written there, that's what I'd write for a conference. So you got just as much evidence from listening to that student read just for that minute.
My query, Libby, is we've pointed out quite a few things that the student needs to work on. Would you only choose maybe one thing to say to the student, though, when you're giving feedback?
Read my mind, Jen. Yes, completely. So, because, and I think the book as well goes into this. Hey, say, when you're talking, and we're going to move on to writing conferences as well, where I talk about this. When you're talking to a student about goal setting, you need to just give them the one goal and you need to make it doable. So I wouldn't say to that student, you're not sounding out correctly, you need to sound out every word correctly from now on. You know, that's very broad, it's not doable. I'd give them a goal that was completely doable, that they could go away and they could start practicing from that moment. So something like, you know, look at this letter pattern here. When you see this letter pattern, it makes this sound. So I really want you to go away and find those letter patterns when you're reading, maybe highlight them, and next time we read together, we're going to focus on making sure that we sound out those letter patterns correctly. If we're talking about rechecking, remember how last time we talked about the rechecking? When we're reading together today, we're going to make sure that you're rechecking areas. And if you're not, I might actually prompt you to do so as well. So yes, one goal, one doable goal, completely, Jen. Well done. Okay, we're going to move on to writing conferences now. Again, and this is just over the page. These are going to look different depending on what year level you're teaching. I have used them a lot more in middle and upper primary, but writing conferences are just as important when you're down in junior end. And I think actually developing the skills of how to run writing conferences is more important when you're in younger years. Because if students don't understand how a writing conference is structured, then they're going to struggle with it when they get to the upper years, and they really need people to be editing their writing or working with them in their writing craft. I love writing conferences, and I learn a lot from how Hancock and Lever explained writing conferences in this chapter. What I've seen prior to teaching were completely teacher-driven conferences where teachers would highlight several errors and get students to go and fix them all, or even worse, when the teacher might take the book, take it away, mark it without the student knowing, and provide really minimal feedback, and the student has looked at it or doesn't even look at it and goes, oh, whatever. A writing conference, though, is neither of these things. It should really be a discussion conference about the student's work, and it focuses on the student as a writer and them developing the craft of writing for themselves. So A writing conference happens at any point in a writing cycle. If you don't know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about a writing cycle, I'd suggest that you have a look up these now or at a later date. But writing cycle is basically when students go through a process of writing. So they start by designing a draft or getting ideas first, designing their draft, editing this, editing it with a buddy, you know, and then going away and deciding how they're going to present that work and publishing it. So, and revising it and all those things. So conference can actually happen at any point in this writing cycle. It doesn't have to happen at the editing stage. That's the first thing that I think is really important that we take away. Writing conferences should be available to students at any point. So when I think about writing conference roster, what I tried to do when I first put writing conferences into work in year 2 was I made a really scheduled roster. But then what I found is that I'd often meet with students and they weren't ready to conference with me with their writing. They might have only just started thinking up a great idea. I had students that wanted to finish all their writing before they came to a conference with me. And then I had these other students that actually wanted to meet with me every week and have a chat about what they should be doing next. So what I went to was a really flexible roster where I had a list up on the board. It said writing conferences at the top and it just had numbers down the side. And students could come and write their name up or sign up for a writing conference. And they could do that at any point during the day. And then what I'd do is I'd work my way down the list. While I did this, I didn't have a line of students waiting there for a writing conference. I actually had everyone else in the class working on the writing cycle. So at some point in the writing cycle. So if they were editing independently or with a buddy. If they were thinking up their ideas, they were doing that independently. So again, writing conferences demand independence, which is so important to develop in those junior years. Even just these procedures, even if writing conferences can only go for 10 minutes because that's the only amount of time that they can focus on a piece of writing independently, then do it for 10 minutes. And then, you know, you slowly extend that, or then you do it for 2 lots of 10 minutes and break it up by running outside on the playground. So, and then what I do is if during the session I didn't get through all the kids' names on the board, I would continue the writing conferences from where I got up to the next time that we came to writing. When students don't sign up, that's right, Michelle, I would actually be keeping those notes for the writing conferences in a very similar way that I showed you for my reading conferences. So I'd have an idea of who's not turning up. Often I actually found that it was my more efficient writers that weren't signing up for writing conferences. And occasionally it was those that were reluctant writers, but more often than that, it was the efficient ones that were kind of like, no, I want to just keep going. And I would say that I would actually sign them up. I'd say, oh, okay, you know, Greg, I actually want to meet with you after 2 other students, okay? So, you know, I've got 2 more conferences to go and then I'm going to meet with you. So I would sign them up sometimes as well. I had one student, she was a really reluctant writer, and she liked to meet with me every writing conference. Oh, sorry, every time we were doing writing. And, you know, sometimes I could achieve that, other times we couldn't. But when a writing conference only has to go for a minute or 2, it gives the student one goal again that they go away and they work with. It's doable. So, you know, we'd sit down one session and she'd go, okay, so I don't know what to do next. And we'd go, okay, well, here's an idea of what you could do next. I'd write it down in her margin so that she could keep note of it, because again, a lot of our reluctant writers sometimes have trouble with their working memory. So having that note of what they've got to do next can be really useful, so that by the time they get to their desk, they haven't forgotten what they're doing. So I'd write that in her column. This is what you're going to do next, or this is what we decided, draw a little picture to help her remember. She'd go and sit down, she'd do that. And then at the start of the next session, she might be like, oh, but now I'm not sure if this part looks right. So then she'd come back up to me and then we might go, okay, so what are some other words that we could use in that area? Oh, I know, here's a great adjective. Let's write some adjective ideas down that you could be using. And then she'd go away and she might insert some of those. And this student became so insanely confident in her writing after a few weeks of this, because she knew that help was available. And she also knew that it was supportive. So once she'd realised that, oh, I'm not just going to get a writing conference every time I finish a piece of work, she actually felt a lot more confident in having a go. So it's a discussion about the student's work, And during it, the student explains 3 things. And it's a one-on-one conference with the student text as well. While the conference is going on, step 3, the student reads their text, especially if they're in junior years and it's hard to decipher for yourself. I get them to read it. And if it's a shorter text, if it's a longer one, I get them just to explain their text. While they're doing this, I go through the text and I do a quick proof edit. And by that, I mean that I edit any mistakes that I don't want to be their goal and I don't want to be the focus of this learning time. So say if I have a student and I really want them to focus on as their goal, their letter reversals, I wouldn't change their letters that are reversed. But if that's not their goal, if I want them to work on having a more powerful opening statement, I'm going to go and change those letter reversals now. So that takes away, it doesn't take away from the focus of what I want them to be doing. So as they're reading or explaining, do those quick edits if you need to. And then give them one goal or takeaway. So at the end of this discussion, and I often prompt students for this discussion, when you say things like, so what's your writing about? And they tell you, and then you say, where are you up to? They tell you that. And these questions are in here as well. And then you say to them, well, what do you think you want, or how can I help you? And students generally have an idea of how you can help them. If they don't, I say, oh, well, I noticed maybe that this is something that we can work on. And with that, you can see I've highlighted it here, Jen. Give them only one goal or one takeaway. If it's about plot or capitalization or sentence length, only give them one. It's a really hard thing to do, especially when we see areas as teachers and we go, oh my gosh, there's so many things that need to be fixed. Just give them one goal, because again, we need to make this doable. We don't want to overload our reluctant writers either. But then again, it's hard for any writer to take criticism. And I'm currently doing a research master's. And so when I get back manuscripts that I'm writing and there's so many edits on them, I go, oh my gosh, I'm a terrible writer. I know that I'm not. But when you are bombarded with all these mistakes you've made, you start to undermine your own confidence in writing. We don't want to do that to our students. We want them to see themselves as writers. We want them to see the editing process as a supportive process. So just giving them one goal or takeaway at a time is really important. If you do have those students that need lots of little reminders, lots of little goals, you can get them to keep signing up for conferences. Say to them, okay, once you've done that, once you've done those letter reversals, I want you to come back to me and sign up again for another conference, and then we're going to look at another goal for you. So during all this, or just after, it's good to write a note for yourself about what that student's working on. I mean, you have those notes then in the column if you are noting that down for the student, what their goals are, so you can see it throughout their writing piece, what goals they've been working on. But write a little note for yourself as well. This is a goal that I brought to that student about, and you can, again, track their progress. On the next slide, I've got students writing. And I want you to think about, if this student comes to you for a writing conference, what might be one takeaway or goal that you might give them? Try to be really specific with your goal that student can then enact. Then you can think of more than one if you'd like to. Share them. Imagine that this is all that this student has written as well. They don't know what they want to work on next, so you give them an idea. What's something that could improve this piece of writing? Think of it that way. You can be really broad too and be like, I don't know, but maybe this thing, and that's fine as well. I might read it. You guys have gone very quiet. I hope you're all still there. I might read it, and maybe you can think of something as I read it. One day not too long ago, there were two friends named Charlie and Mia. They did everything together, like go on adventures or find mysteries. Then one day they were playing in Charlie's backyard and Mia tripped over something and fell onto the grass. Yeah, rereading, self-editing. Maybe you just want them to go and underline areas that they've made. Thank you, Sophie. Oh, sorry, what year level was this? This was year 4. Jen said add more detail. Exactly. Expanding on how they introduce the characters or fleshing out what Mia tripped on. You could say you tripped on something really hard. More adjectives, more describing words, yeah. And you might highlight there and say, I really want you to describe this friendship. Were they close friends? Were they best friends? Why is it called The Box? Yes, to rethink your title. If it is a mystery that you're trying to write, which I think it is, maybe The Box is kind of gives it away. The character development, yeah. So perhaps take some time at the beginning to actually describe these characters. Casey, the sizzling starts or those really engaging starts. Alternatives about one day, then one day. You can see that repetition that this student's using. Perhaps they don't actually have an idea of how else to start. You could talk to them about the fact that maybe this isn't even needed one day not too long ago. They could actually just start with, there were two friends named Charlie and Mia, and then get on with the story. Wow, guys, amazing, amazing, amazing. Look at all these brilliant goals that are attainable as well. You just need to be so specific when you say to that student, I want you to do, I think this thing would really improve your writing. And they can just take it and run with it and improve their writing, become a better writer. If you have any questions about writing conferences, feel free to ask them. Again, these look different. These look different for every year group. And I say, you know, that they shouldn't necessarily be about spelling or punctuation or letter formation, but when you've got those early writers, when they're beginning their writing, sometimes those need to be the goals because those are the lessons that they're learning day to day. We're going to move on now. I host different writing conferences for different writing types. I'm assuming that you mean kind of like text types. Thank you, Casey. Oh, probably not, Jen. I think because I'm still focusing on them as in their writing craft. Yes, it might change because, say, if you're doing a persuasive text and you say to them, look, you're telling me a story here, you're not actually persuading me in any way, the goals might change.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So they do need to kind of have an understanding of what text they're working on.
Yeah. I phrased it poorly, but perhaps like it doesn't have to be an exclusively literacy focused task. Like for instance, if you're encouraging students to learn how to write procedures or testing methods in science, would you potentially host a writing conference for that?
Yes, completely. And I just finished, and actually the book's out now, writing a chapter in a book about how we write in every area of schooling. There's writing in every area, and actually and that's the most engaging way to write as well. So even if, you know, you're writing about your methods in maths and you're writing about how you worked out a problem, then that recount, that way of writing is really important for students to learn. So you can run a writing conference no matter where you're teaching and what you're teaching. Completely, yes. And the way that you structure it might need to be different, yes.
Yeah, okay.
If students are able to write independently, then you can do writing conferences in that time. And if it's that, because for me, you're not going to get a conference with every kid in the class during one session. If it's a piece of writing that you're going to keep coming back to, then you can run writing conferences around it. Or you might just have a focus group. I've also done writing conferences perhaps with 3 or 4 kids at one time. And we've actually looked at one student's work together, and then the other kids have been able to learn a little bit from that writing conference. But then, you know, as we're kind of workshopping all together our writing, when they're doing kind of a similar piece of writing, or also when they're EALD and they're learning how to put together a piece of text. So a lot of similar kind of learning goals.
Would you be using exemplars for that?
Yes, or sometimes sometimes I'm modelling the writing as well though. So you know, I show them a model piece of how I might go next, or what I might do next. Yeah. Okay. We're going to look at a few strategies now that might not be strategies that you use every day, but they're extremely helpful in promoting literacy in your classroom, and they can really assist your students in their literacy. And we're going to look at 2 of these. There we go. Oh, sorry. It just stopped for a second there. The first one is fast writes. Now, I've seen these go by so many, yes, I love my names, so many names. And this one is such a fantastic strategy that you can really whip out very easily. It's explained on page 18 as well if you want to go over there. It can give you a piece of writing very quickly to workshop with students, and it can also give you a snapshot of their writing style, but more importantly, it can make students fall in love with writing again. And I've used fast writes I've used them with this group of year 4s who were that class that you'd walk into and you'd say, "It's writing time, guys," and they'd go, ugh. They just had fallen out of love with writing, and it was all those things that got in the way of their writing, you know, the fact that they had trouble spelling and their handwriting was messy and all this stuff that just stopped them from being able to be creative and write. So a fast write though can take away all those extra things and can actually just allow students the time to write again. The rules the steps here are that firstly explain the rules. Now the rules are that everyone is writing non-stop for the time limit, and that the writing is the focus, not the spelling, not the sentence structure, not the grammar. And that second rule is really important because it means that you free these students up to just write, to feel uninhibited for a moment with their spelling that they're struggling with their punctuation they might be struggling around. They can actually just be creative again. And that they're writing non-stop, that adds that kind of competition to it, and it really does engage students, especially if there is a timer. So you do need to, as a second step, give them some kind of time limit. Now make this really visible, have a timer or a clock up on a smartboard if you've got one, or if you've just got a whiteboard, put the numbers up there and cross them off as you go through the fast write, but make it really, or even just one of those big sand dials, make it visible. Now, the third step is that you need to model somehow. And by modeling a fast write to your students, you're giving them an example. So when students first do a fast write, I definitely would model to them what it would look like if I was doing a fast write. So, you know, I'm writing and then I'm going to check how much time's left. Okay, I can fit this part in. They might notice that I stop at points and I think about my ideas, but I don't stop for long. I cross out things, I go back and I change bits, or I notice that that word doesn't look right, so I might underline it. So modeling those writing behaviours. Generally, as students though get confident in fast writes, you'll find that you don't need to do it prior to a fast write anymore. So it's generally just the first time or second time that you run a fast write with a class that you'll need to model. But as we continue, I am always writing while the kids are writing during the fast write, so they can see that modelled writing behaviour from me as they're also writing. The fourth step is that you need to give the students some kind of stimulus. Now, there are so many great stimuluses out there for writing. Just search writing prompts and you'll see ton, but you can use anything as a stimulus for writing. You can use a piece of music. You can use an object. You can use something in the news. You can use a word. You can think about fast writes along the curriculum and think about the fact that you could do a fast write as a pre-assessment or a post-assessment for any kind of subject, and have that subject up there as your stimulus. So, you know, I want to know everything you know about living things. So living things, that's your stimulus. Just have a fast write on that. Your fast writes, I talk about them a little bit, I think, as if they're only narrative, but they can actually be any text type. You can say, today we're all going to do a fast write where you have to persuade me to buy this drink bottle. You know, depending on what you want to do, or you can open it up. I often just open it up and say, you can write anything that you want. You can write a poem, you can write a letter, whatever you want. So you need to get them some kind of stimulus. And then this is what's really important that I think a lot of people miss out when they do a fast write, is that you have some kind of warm up before they start writing. And this really needs to be that thinking time. It might be that the students talk together about their ideas. It might be that you make a big brainstorm, or you write a whole bunch of words down that come out. And then the students write. And they just write solely for the time limit. And I like to say it's writing time, not talking time, so that it is silent and they just get to write. And then finally, it's important that they have an opportunity to share. I always allow this to be an opt-in time, but sometimes to keep kids accountable, it's good that they all share. And if students don't feel that they're confident enough to share, then you can share their writing as well. Here's a fast write that I did with a Year 3 class. We had this image. I don't like to talk a lot about the images that I show to students. We just kind of leave them there and let students kind of get whatever information they want out of it, I guess, to open up that creativity as well. Here you can see I've got the timer on the board as well. Then we have thought about that. We've had a warm-up where we've actually asked questions about that image. And so from this brainstorm, students actually got a lot of vocabulary that they could then use for their fast write. So things like, he is admiring. And this was particularly good for this cohort of students that were really, unconfident writers and did have a lot of trouble spelling. They could have some of those keywords up there to go and refer to that they might want to use in their writing. And then finally, we started writing, and with this group, I actually did this using Chromebooks. So they could share their writing with me through Google Docs, and then we could actually share it up on the board for everyone to see. And of course, this was an opt-in and opt-out thing, and some students decided that they'd prefer to write on paper, and they could share that as well. Okay, so now it's your turn. And for this, you need to dust off your keyboard. You need to put down that cup of tea or that sneaky glass of wine, and you're going to do a fast write. This is our stimulus, this image here that you can see. And I'm only going to give you a minute. So I'd suggest to pop your cursors into the chat square where you can type your message here, ... And when I say go, start writing whatever you want about this image that you can see, and then we're all going to share it. We're all going to post at the end. Okay? Are you ready? Set, go. I'm going to be writing too. Finish in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and post. Woohoo! Look at all this great writing. Oh, it's amazing. So you guys can, you know, scroll up and down the chat as well and have a read of each other's. I'll just read a few. Oh my gosh, so many great pieces of writing. And you can get a copy of the chat as well. You know, you print this out, make it as your first manuscript. Catherine's whoosh, I can hear as I'm running so fast, I feel I'm going to fall over into concrete in front of me. I can feel my heart beating out of my chest. As I'm running, I begin to think about what just happened and I heard a whoosh or a woof. I love it. Casey, the texture of the pavement became a blur as I ran faster and harder than I thought my feet could carry me. I could feel hot breath on the back of my neck, but I focused on the ground in front of me and I just kept running. I felt my heart in my chest as though it was going to beat right out, but I kept running. Amazing. Sophie, wow, this is not real. I'm definitely dreaming. This cannot be real. If I slap myself, I'll wake up from this horrible dream. Michelle, I'm going to be eating. The enormous boxer dog started chasing me. He thought I was food. Amazing. Wow, give yourselves a pat on the back. That is brilliant writing. So you can see how fast writes are a lot of fun. They really do free you up just to be creative and enjoy writing for a moment, or for 10 minutes or 20 minutes, however long you let them go for in your classroom. Of course, with junior years as well, I would sometimes give them the sentence starter or some of the key vocabulary that they might need to be able to continue a fast write or to put into a fast write. Just sometimes to start them off, it can be really useful. Okay, now we're going to move on to a topic that's quite close to my heart, and this is critical analysis of visual text. So this is something that I'm researching at the moment, where we're looking at, you know, websites and the messages that they provide students with, and some of those hidden messages as well. I actually think that this is a real life skill, being able to analyse visual texts. And being able to analyse any text is such a huge skill now for our students going into the environment that they're living in. And we know it's so much more now with some of the fake news, with all the news that we're being, you know, sent every which way at the moment. Our students need to be able to not only read this information in the visual, but also be able to critically analyse it and go, okay, well, that's true, that's false, that's real, that's unreal. That's showing me a real stereotypical image, that's not real to life, all this kind of stuff. And if you think about all the different places that we see visual text now, it's not just in picture books, it's on walls, it's in magazines, it's on, you know, any screen that you look at has a visual text looking right back at you. So everywhere there's visual text. I really recommend reading The Shape of Text to Come by John Callow if you're interested in this. He talks way more about this strategy and all the things that you need to be able to do with your students, and what the Australian curriculum says as well about visual text and critical analysis of them. Now this strategy follows, it's on page 73 and 74, if you haven't flipped there yet. It follows a feature analysis of visual text, which I think is really important to do before you actually get into critically analysing them, because students need to already be able to understand what the parts of that text are to be able to interpret them. Especially now considering the diversity of visual text. So, you know, the pictures that we see in the newspaper are different kind of visual text to what we see on Instagram. So when you're talking about that, you need to kind of talk about, okay, well, these visual texts are used for this purpose and this is their function, and then you start to analyse them. And the steps here are that firstly you use a topical text. Now we've got so many of those at the moment, but the authors here mentioned talking about using some of the books in your class. I would move that even just to movie adaptations of the stories that you're reading. So when I was reading The Rabbit Proof Fence with this Year 5 class, we then looked at a small snippet of that movie and we analysed that. And having that meaning from the book was really useful. But there is just so much. So I'd say use something relevant in which the students might have an opinion. It could be how students are represented in something. It could be something community-based, so how your community is represented, or even just how Australians are represented. Do a Google search and see what images come up when you talk about Australia now in the media, and there are a lot of images there. And you could say, okay, well, what does this make you think? People are thinking about Australia. You know, I think that's something as well that can be really good, a text that picture these students and picture and in their lives every day. If you look at some of the ads on TV for children's toys, you know, what are the children doing? What kinds of toys are they playing with? Does that look like you? Do you act like that? Those are really important questions to be asking these students so they can critically analyse these visuals. The second step is that we let the students just view that text. They can enjoy it. You might explain those parts that they miss or any knowledge that they might need to be able to interpret that text. So when I've used Pixar short films as a visual text for critical analysis, there's one that's set in a schoolyard, and it's an American schoolyard, and it looks really different to what an Australian playground looks like. So I kind of had to explain that to the students, and their recess break means something different than it means for us, because to understand and interpret this visual text, if they didn't have that knowledge already, then they'd be a little bit lost. The third step is that they need to explore some questions based around the text. And these ones are all listed over the 2 pages. And this is really just the start of that critical analysis, where you start to talk about who the intended audience is of the text, who are the producers and what was their purpose? Why did someone make this text? What did they want to get out of it? And who did they make it for? So these two kind of go together. The reality and the realism of the text. Now that speaks to the purpose as well. So does this text seem like real life? Does it seem very fake? And then you can talk about, well, what gives you that impression? What do you know about the world that tells you that this text looks fake or that this text looks real? Is it fake trying to imitate real, which is quite common in a lot of texts as well? That can lead to a really great discussion. Who is missing? So, you know, we're looking at that children's toy catalogue and we're saying, well, where are the adults? Where are the parents? Where are the grandparents? Where are the people who actually buy the toys? Why aren't they pictured? So actually talking about who is missing gives you insight in the goal of that text and that text's purpose. And finally, any stereotypes that you see there. So when we're looking at that, again, children's toy catalogue, and we go, well, why are the girls playing with all these pink toys, the boys playing with those blue toys? Is that a stereotype? Sometimes you'll find texts that are trying to break stereotypes as well, and that's a great discussion to have, and say, you know, is this conforming to stereotypes or breaking them? Now, these kinds of questions are things that we can start talking to our students about very early on, when you start to get them to question the images in the world around them. So it is something that you can make routine, and that's what Step 4 is about. It's about critical analysis not being a one-off, but it actually being something that you continue back to with students, you know, hopefully weekly, because what you want it to become is that these questions, these ways of interrogating a text actually become very natural to your students, so that when they're, you know, when you've got some website up and you're reading some information, they're actually already looking at the images and going, that doesn't look like New Zealand. I don't know, like that looks unrealistic. I think that's been photoshopped, or I think you know, they've put that there to try to market this place to us. And finally, students create a text. So rather than just viewing it, you allow students to redesign that text. Now, with all that knowledge that they know, they could make a text in a very similar way that visual text been made. So, you know, if it's got a real intended audience, they might have the same intended audience with their text they make, and say if it's a poster to persuade people to recycle. You know, now that they know all that stuff about what posters that persuade people to recycle need in them, they can actually redesign it to be similar, or they might change it. They might decide that they're going to make it, you know, break some stereotypes in it, or they're going to change who the audience is. They're going to aim it more for children, or they're going to aim it more for parents. So by changing one of these as well, you can then make a really interesting redesign. So I've got a little activity for you here as well. We're going to look at the Teach for Australia website. And I'm going to change the way that you can see it actually, so it's easier for you to see the whole thing. And we're just going to look at the visual images here, and we're going to critically analyse them. So if you've got the book there next to you, it's going to be particularly helpful for this part. I want you to have a look at some of those focus areas, and is there something that strikes you about the images or the image that, because I've only got one on our screen at the moment, that, that you can see here? Can we say anything about the intended audience? Is there anything that strikes you about this image just to begin with? Because that's always a good way to start. And then we can look at some of these focus questions as well. Who are we thinking about are the producers, and what's their purpose of this image? Who's made this image and why? Can you already tell me that from the image that you can see? Do they have something to gain by putting this image on their website? Does do you know what Teach for Australia is? I'm just assuming this knowledge.
It appears to be some kind of website for support for teachers, maybe.
Okay, so they're good try. Thank you. Bingo. No. Yes, it is about earning maths. So what you can do is, if you're a professional in another industry, so you already have a Bachelor of, I don't know, health, and you've been a nurse for 18 years and you decide that actually I'd like to be a teacher, you can do a 6-month like intensive program, I think it is. Maybe it's a little bit wrong, I could be wrong. And then you become a teacher and you get put in a school. So you don't get a choice over what school you go to. So you can think of the kinds of schools in Australia that have trouble recruiting people to teaching. Yes. And those are the kinds of schools that people who go for Teach for Australia end up in. So it's generally our rural and remote schools, the schools that have trouble in attracting teachers. So now that you know that, I've given you a little bit about the producers. Who do you think their intended audience is? And we've already got some great critical analysis happening. Are they selling a degree? Yes, they are, aren't they? They're trying to recruit, Georgie's saying. It's shiny and white and bright and smiley. Isn't teaching so much fun and organised and smiley and rewarding? I love it. We can talk about the reality and the realism of it there, can't we, Georgie? And all the desks are so empty, Laura says. All the natural light in Wide State. I think that's exactly it as well. You guys have this knowledge about teaching, you know what it looks like. So speaking about the reality and the realism of this is so easy, because we're like, look, I don't look like that on a good day, let alone at the beginning of the day. What's happened to all the marking on her desk? That's a question that I need to ask this lady. And also, how come she's got a stack of dictionaries? Dictionaries are like the hardest thing to find in a school. Oh, Laura, she's married. I love that that's the thing that you picked up on. That's really interesting. Shows the teacher as an agent for change. They do, like, oh, look at me, I'm improving my students' grades. If I got most improved, B+. Well, where's the student with the A? No. Student success with B+. Yeah. So, oh, this teacher can do, maybe on photo day you look like that, Casey. Oh, awesome. That's amazing. I wish I looked like that on photo day. But we can talk about the reality and realism of it. We can see this as a really highly, what's the word, contrived image of a teacher. Oh, that's right, Casey. Maybe they've done B+ to make it seem more realistic. Yes. Yes, so Jen's now starting to think about multimodal text, and she's looking at the text and the image and she's trying to put them together and see, well, what's the whole message here? And that Jen, is perfect, and that would be the next step, that you go from visual, because most visual texts now are not just purely visual. They do go with a text, or like words text. Someone mentioned here as well about the teacher being white and being female, and so I think that's really speaking into and also look at her age, like you know, you're talking about a stereotype here, aren't you? Yeah, young, that's exactly it. So they're trying to obviously reach a demographic, aren't they? That's exactly it. So I'm going to scroll down now, and you guys are great at critically analysing images, even just in the chat. Oh, I've gone to the wrong one, but there was one, maybe it's on this one, about the program. There was another image which I love sharing. No, not that one. I mean, that one's good too. Oh yeah, let's just use this one. Why not? What can we say about this image then, if we were critically analysing it? Intended audience, producers and purpose. Sounds a bit quirky, isn't it? Who's missing? We can look at both those images now and think, well, who's missing here? Again, reality and realism. Students, where are the kids? There's the reason why both these teachers look so highly polished and clean. They don't have any students. Perfect. I'm going for Teach for Strat. Parents, admin staff, teacher assistants, teacher aides. The connection to literature and teaching. Yes, investigative process. Oh, teaching's a bit of fun. Look at me playing with my magnifying glass. Yes, here you can see they're trying to break some of that stereotype that they've already talked to us about on the first page. Updated workspaces. Does this look real to you still? Does it look more real or less real? I'm looking for you. That's a bit cringy, isn't it? We could keep going with this, you can see. I just love your engagement with this, and I don't want to move on, but we're going to move on. You can see how much fun a critical analysis can be. It brings in that discussion and that oral language with students. It does look way too pristine. I am a librarian, and my shelves never look like this, ever. Like, except maybe at the end of the day if all the shelving's done. But yes, it does not look realistic to me at all. It looks kind of like they've gone into a public library and taken a picture. So this kind of critical analysis, you guys brought a lot to that because you have that knowledge of teaching and schools. So you can see how it's really important that we start with a topical text with our students. And I think that one kind of text that's very topical for a lot of students are memes, especially for students in upper primary. So you can have a look at memes and go, oh, look at how they're so stereotypical, and why do they have that font, and why are the faces so expressive, and what are they trying to do with that? For example, this, or maybe that's how you look when the laminator's broken. I know that I look like that when the laminator's broken. So critical analysis can be done with any visual image. We're going to move on now to getting organised. There's a lot of great information and organisational tools mentioned in the book, including T-charts, Venn diagrams, semantic webs, and these are all listed as thinking strategies, but they're also excellent planning devices. I'm actually just going to touch on one of these, and that is reading response journals. Now, I talked about these before when I was talking about guided reading. Students need some way to respond to their reading, and a reading response journal can really be that great way to respond. The steps here are that we model this. We show students how to respond to their reading. We explain to them that it's not a retell. When they respond to their reading, they're actually responding over a strategy, or they're telling us how they've felt or what they've thought about as they've been reading that day. We need to give students that time to write in their response journal. That might be that might be during reading, so they can stop as they're reading, or you might actually need to be really skilled with that and say, okay, you've got 2 minutes left. I want you now to stop and write your response to what you've read. And then finally, you need to allow students to invite you need to invite students to share their ideas, share their responses, and that's what gives you that that ownership over the students' reading. So you know they've read, they can show you what they've learned, and you can actually already assess how they've understood their reading that day. And of course, you respond to the students' entries. Now, we've chatted, we've had so much fun this afternoon. There are some examples of reading response journals, either writing in the book or writing on post-it notes. And I could keep going. I could talk about class meetings, thoroughly tell you to check them out. Great if you want a democratic classrooms. And we could talk about information grids. These are really useful as a writing tool. But I do feel like I've bombarded you with stuff this afternoon. So I'm going to stop there and also hit 6:30. I want you to tell me or think about what your one takeaway is, what your one goal is. Think about that as the writing conference, you know, the reading conference. What's the one goal or takeaway that you want to work on or put into your teaching that we might have talked about this afternoon? Just have a second before you walk away from your computer this afternoon to decide that to yourself. What's that one thing that, you know, next time you go into a prac or next time you get into the classroom, you want to give it a try? We don't have any time for questions, but I will hang around for a minute if anyone does have a question for me. But finally, if you don't want to ask a question now and you'd rather email me with it later, if you are one of those lovely pre-service teachers who are going on prac, maybe soon, maybe not soon, so soon, also feel free to send me an email. You know, you might want that refresh of, oh, Libby, you talked about guided reading and I'm trying to do it like this, but it's not quite working. Can you give me an idea why? Da, da, da. I'm happy to talk literacy. I'm a big literacy nerd and I love this kind of stuff. And Laura's sharing what her takeaway is. Casey shared what her takeaway is. Sign up sheet for one-on-one conferencing, reading conferences into your silent reading. Great idea, Laura. Any questions? If not, have a lovely evening. I hope that you all get some time and that you really take care of yourselves and your communities during this crazy time. Yeah. But thank you so much for being such a great group. I had so much fun this afternoon. Georgie said writing conferences. I'm going to use this. Thanks so much. It was great. Do I run any other PD sessions? Oh, that's lovely, Casey. Send me an email. Yes, I do. Yeah, I'm not scheduled to do any more online ones for now, but you never know. You never know. Oh, I don't know why, but yeah, if I go back to the first slide, I've got a blog and I'm on Instagram and Twitter and all of those things as well. Yes, there's my blog there as well, where I write a little bit about literacy strategies. So if you want to go there, you can. If not, I'll see you later. That's awesome. I'm just going to stop.
Thanks so much, Libby. It's been...
Hey, Georgie.
Thanks so much. It's been really, really awesome. I have learnt heaps and the book is great and no, really, yeah, really, really good. Thank you very much.
That's lovely. I've really enjoyed these workshops, so it's a little bit sad to see the end of them, but we're out of books, so have to end at some point. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think it something like this would be great to do, you know, for Alia to do relatively regularly for new teachers. So just things like, you know, you talk about guided reading and not just, you know, set up your guided reading, but actually what it looks like in practice is something else entirely. So that kind of discussion is really valuable.
That's so true. Yeah. And, you know, feel free to send through any of that feedback to Robin as well. She sits on National Council of ALIA. And so all that feedback goes back to the National Council as well. But yeah, thanks everyone. Have a great night.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to stop recording now as well. And